And if I learn that you've held anything back, your family will be having a fish fry in your honor. You don't want your families touched? Make them untouchable. This is Bedtime Stories, Genesis, Part 18. When we left off, Star and True were in separate cities, but both women were preparing to get twisted up like pretzels. Selima had ran out of the house to be Captain Save-A-Nigga, after Wise had left out of the house to be Captain Save-A-Hoe. And in Miami, Catherine and Manny were waiting at the underground for Sincere. When their flight arrived, they'd all gone their separate ways and agreed to meet at the underground. Manny had put the call out to all of the organizations that the Five Families had alliances with. Catherine had met up with her team and gotten an update. While the kidnappers hadn't made contact, there had been some suspicious activity on the college campus where the triplets were enrolled. Star and Chantal both stayed on campus. All of Chantal's classes were already online, so she didn't have to make any adjustments to go to Texas, and she hadn't alerted anybody in her inner circle that she was even leaving town. There wasn't a single solitary person in her world who knew anything about the St. James family, the Five Families, her parents' lifestyles, or the circumstances surrounding their death. And it wasn't just because she was a private person or because she understood the need for secrecy. It was because her super religious behind was ashamed. Most of the people in her circle were also super religious. Chantal was apostolic, and she dressed the part everywhere she went. Catherine had tasked Chantal's security, who remained in Miami, with keeping all of the places that Chantal typically frequented under constant surveillance. That included her dorm room, the library, the campus chapel, and her church off campus, the duck pond near the campus, and the nursing home where she volunteered. And they'd learned that there'd been someone asking questions about Chantal. The minute Simone disappeared, Catherine planted a seed. She had Chantal tell one of the main gossipers at her church, who also attended her university, that she'd left for spring break early, but she would be returning when spring break was over. And it didn't take long for the gossiper to get the word out. Within a day or so, the people who'd been looking for Chantal had slunk back into the shadows. But Catherine knew that they'd be back when spring break ended, and so would Chantal. Well, not really. Catherine had a plan. If her suspicions about what Stanley knew and what he communicated were correct, the streets were thinking that Simone and Chantal were twins. And they didn't know a thing about Star. You'd think that with all three of the young ladies going to the same school, it would be widely known that they were triplets. They were identical after all, but with different personalities, different styles, and different lifestyles. They didn't move in the same circles. They were rarely, if ever, actually seen together. And their worlds did not intersect on campus. They'd actually gone out of their way to create their own individual lives and lanes. And they'd been successful at doing so, which meant Catherine's plan would work like a charm. When Sincere finally arrived at the underground, Catherine said, "You're late." Sincere said, "My B, I got a little caught up." Manny said, "I hope being caught up included being seen in all the right places looking for your sister, because that was your assignment." Sincere said, "Yeah, I did that, but I had some personal business I had to handle." Catherine said, "Good, let's go." Then they headed into a meeting room that was full to the rafters with men and women, bosses, who were leaders of their own criminal organizations. The group had been gathered for almost 20 minutes, and despite the wait, there wasn't a mumbling word in the room, because the boss of all bosses had called the meeting, and there wasn't a soul in it who wanted to get on his bad side. Almost as soon as they entered the room, Manny said, "Thank you for coming. I'm going to make this short and sweet, and then you all are going to tell me everything you know. Don't you all speak at once. And if I learn that you've held anything back, your family will be having a fish fry in your honor." Then Manny ran down the situation in its full magnitude. How things started with the trafficking organization, how the things that were happening in the present day were connected to things that happened with Big Wood when he was 8 years old, the government and the family's efforts to interrupt and disrupt the organization, and the plots and plans that the families knew about, that the organization had attempted to put in play against the Five Families and the people that they love. To wrap it up, Manny said, "I took the life of my own son to protect the Notorious Five Families, the Lopez family, and all of the people connected to me. Please believe me when I say that I won't hesitate to take the life of any and everybody who makes the mistake of aligning themselves with these traffickers. I will not do business with anyone who does business with an organization who's made it their life's mission to victimize women, children, the vulnerable. I don't give a damn what your proclivities are. I don't care what they threaten to expose. They come at you, your men, your women, your families, with any accusations, be they true or false, and attempt to use them to manipulate you against the Five Families. You come to me. Instead of joining up with them to try and protect your secrets, use our ongoing relationship to your advantage. We're stronger in numbers. I promise you, If they shenan once, they gonna shenan again. And they ain't got no loyalty. Most of the men and women that we've gotten our hands on, who are employed by or have been manipulated by them, can attest to the fact that they use and dispose of people with little to no regard. They're not a family. We've aligned ourselves with you all because your organizations operate like families. You don't want your families touched? Make them untouchable. When he was done, everybody who knew anything was talking. The International Trafficking Organization had, in fact, press representatives from several of the organizations present. And while they all swore that they were not in bed with the traffickers and had no knowledge of Simone's abduction, they vowed to figure out exactly who was. Many of the heads in the room had heard about Nigel's children, and they knew them by name: Sincere, Simone, and Chantal. Saint and Star's identities were still safe. That meant that Catherine's plan could be executed, and Saint could also be used if necessary. But it was much more important to Catherine to have Sincere and Saint in Paris and Japan, finishing their last 2 assignments. Saint, Chantal, and Star still hadn't even been informed that Simone was missing, and Catherine knew that they would be pissed when they found out. Her hope was that by the time they did find out, she'd already be found and home safe. But she was willing to suffer their anger, because telling them now wouldn't serve a purpose and wouldn't help them reach the goal. Catherine was in her 50s, but she was ruthless. She could plot, plan, and scheme with the best of them, better than the best of them. And while Sincere was going through his training, he was going to learn from the best of them. In the 5 families, Catherine had no equal. The Queen Mother was a cold piece of work, but even she didn't really compare, because Catherine had been in the life since she was 12 years old, and she remained in the life even after she married. And without children, she was free to operate and move however she needed to, and she had the luxury of anonymity, of playing the background. Nigel got to be the face, while she got to be the brains. While Q was currently the face of the St. James family, she was still the brain. And the only reason why she was at this meeting and not Q was so that she could play the role of devastated and concerned stepmother. She wanted to play on their heartstrings. She'd lost her husband, and now her stepdaughter, who she loved dearly, was missing. If Mandy's speech didn't work, the tears that she manufactured at the drop of a dime would absolutely do the trick. More people than she could count in that room had come over to her to console her, to pledge their loyalty to the 5 families, and to vow to help her save her baby girl. Now, don't misunderstand me. Catherine was absolutely upset that Simone had been taken. She had no idea what they were doing to her. She genuinely cared for all of Nigel's children. She'd been the reason why they ate, were educated, trained, provided for. But Catherine Montclair St. James was a stone cold killer. Her present state of mind was passivity. It wasn't a fearful bone in her body. She didn't have time to worry about Simone. She was full steam ahead, enraged, and she was ready, willing, and planning to pop heads off like corks in champagne bottles. She wasn't a distraught stepmother. She was a triggered killer, and that was dangerous. Sincere was confused. He had never seen Catherine emotional. She ain't drop a tear at his father's memorial service or funeral. The closest she'd come to showing any emotion whatsoever was during their initial one-on-one meeting, when she told him his life and all she'd done to ensure the success of it. From that point on, she'd been shaping, molding, and pouring into him, and he'd been trying to get her to show him some emotion. He'd been raised by a mother whose affection was performative, and a great part of how he showed up as a man was directly connected to his mother wound. So he'd been looking for love and trying to build a relationship with Catherine, and she'd been trying to meet him where he was, but she'd shown that she wasn't an outwardly emotional individual. Manny knew that Catherine was performing. Sincere did not. So when they left the underground and headed to the St. James estate in Miami, Sincere asked, "You love us for real, huh?" Catherine said, "Of course I do." Sincere said, "Why you don't never show it, though?" Catherine said, "I don't." Sincere said, "Nah, not like how you just showed it back at the underground." Then Catherine realized she'd even fooled Sincere. She quickly decided that she wasn't going to dissuade his assumptions. Instead, she said, "I am not a very overtly emotional person. I'm not very demonstrative. I didn't grow up in a household where my father told my brothers to man up and pampered and coddled me. From an early age, I was fighting and shooting and hunting right alongside my brothers and my father. I can't even remember a time that my father hugged me. I don't know that my mother ever even told me she loved me. So I'm figuring out this stepmother thing as I go along. The truth of the matter is, I'll give you whatever you need. But I'm a person who you're going to have to tell what you need. Because on the emotional side, I'm just not that intuitive. I've learned to read people, to figure out what makes them tick, to do what's necessary to get what I need, to get them to do what they need to. And if that requires emotion, I've learned to deliver it. But one of the reasons why your father went outside of our relationship is because he couldn't get me to be all warm and fuzzy. I didn't have it in me to worship the ground a man walked on. I could be a partner, be his twin, strategize, plan, execute. I could be a damn good lover, but he could miss me with cuddling and romanticizing our relationship. He needed that, and I somehow missed that. I learned how to manipulate people as a function of this life. But one of the things I was committed to, after seeing how my father manipulated my mother and us kids, was not to use those same manipulation skills in my personal life. So even when I did want something from your father, I didn't suddenly become demonstrative to get it. I think that's one of the things that sent Amir over the edge. When you get involved with somebody else's spouse, it's real easy to believe that if that spouse was no longer there, you'll get all the things that's missing in your non-relationship. Not only will you have the opportunity to have a real relationship, but you'll get all the components of a relationship. He didn't realize that Nigel was not the reason I wasn't affectionate with him. That I wasn't all warm and fuzzy, talking sweethearts and baby. He thought with Nigel out of the way, that would change, because he didn't know me. He thought he loved me, but you can't really love somebody you don't know. I was able to show that side today because I have those feelings for real. But I had to work to do so. That means I'm capable. And yeah, I figured that out a long time ago. But by the time I figured it out, it was too late with your father. I hope it's not too late with you. Then Sincere opened his arms, and Catherine walked into them and gave him a huge hug. And she could tell that it was just what he needed. It didn't take long for multiple leads to come in. By the next morning, the general in Miami that Catherine had on the case had already run down several of those leads and had called Catherine with a report. At that same time, in New Jersey, Eve and Taryn had checked out of the chateau and they were heading back to New York. Their night had ended with a bang. In the wee hours of the morning, when they left the bar, Taryn didn't even wait till they'd gotten back to Eve's room to start pleasuring her. And Stern wasn't the least bit surprised, considering that play that he put down right at the hotel bar on the elevator, which wasn't empty, by the way. Taryn had Eve hold down the front of her bodycon dress while he raised the back just enough to slide his hand under her ample butt cheeks and slide a finger into her opening. He dipped in and out and stirred like he was adding honey to a hot cup of tea, and Star was biting her lip in order to maintain her composure. Thankfully, the elevator had emptied out right when she thought she was going to release. Right before she could, the elevator stopped on their floor. Taryn, the Punisher, withdrew his hand to Eve's dismay, picked her up, carried her out of the elevator, down the hall, and to her hotel room door. She slipped the key card out of her purse, swiped it on the door, and Taryn pushed it open with his shoulder while carrying her inside. As soon as the door was closed, he stood her on her feet, pushed her form-fitting dress up over her hips, got down on his knees, put one of her legs over his shoulder, and wasted no time diving in head first. It didn't take long for Star to be back on the edge. And just like in the elevator, Taryn pulled away before she could get hers. Panting, Eve said, "Okay, so look, you're not going to keep doing that. You're not going to play with me until I'm begging for the D. It's not going to happen." Taryn said, "That's not the goal. I'm trying to drive you crazy, make you fall in love. When I'm done with you, you're going to want me. And now that you told me where you stand, you ain't going to have me. I'm going to lick every part of you, put you in the shower and do it all over again. And I'm not going to stop until you calling me daddy and tapping out." And Star shivered. Taryn helped her out of her dress. And when he saw that her perky D cups was sitting up all by themselves because she ain't had no bra on, he got rock hard. And she could see that what she'd heard about Jamaican men was true. He was packing, and it was going to be well worth the wait. Too bad he was going to have to die. Taryn just stood there, staring at her. Eve said, "What?" Taryn said, "I just want to look at you. Your body is a work of art. I don't know if I'm going to be able to let you go when you go back to school. We just might have to make an arrangement. Spin around one time for me." Star thought to herself, "Oh, this nigga a dirty old man for real. I like that." She spun around like he asked and made her cheeks clap while she did. And Taryn said, "God damn." He slapped her on her cheek and said, "Bend that ass over." And when she did, he licked, slurped, sucked, and kissed the front and the back until Eve, Star, exploded. She'd been with men who did all that, and she had to fake a big O to get them to stop. She'd had to show more men than she could count how to make her go. But it was clear that Taryn ain't need no help, and she was going to enjoy every bit of this. She was just glad he brought her back to her room and not his, because when he'd signed the check at the bar, he'd needed a pen. Apparently, he'd left the dupe in his room. The last thing she wanted was Louis, her Haitian connect, to overhear all the hollering and screaming she was fixing to do, because they hadn't gotten in the door good, and she was already vocal. When she nearly collapsed on the floor, Taryn picked her up and carried her over to the dresser, where he promptly leaned her back against the wall and went in for another meal. This time, though, he stopped before she got off, picked her up, laid her on the bed, disrobed down to his boxer briefs, went to the end of the bed, and put her big toe in his mouth. Then he proceeded to do exactly what he'd promised. He kissed and licked all over Eve, and by the time he was done, she was screaming. When she exploded for a second time, he let her catch her breath, carried her into the shower, washed her from neck to toe, and while they were both soaking wet, he did it all over again. Star could barely stand up on her own 2 feet. She was falling and running all over that shower, and Taryn was holding her up and chasing her. Her third big O came courtesy of his finger game, because in order to hold her up, he had to wrap one arm around her waist and play with her kitty from the back. And Eve was thinking to herself, what harm would it do if I just let him slip it in? But she had to remind herself that that was not a part of the plan. So the next morning, before they left the hotel, Taryn came to Eve's room and saw that she was in jeans and a sweater. He said, nah, baby girl, that's not gonna work. Put on one of them little dresses you got and don't put no panties on. I'm trying to have some fun on the ride back. And Eve obliged. She didn't care nothing about the driver. If Taryn wanted to give him a show, he was gonna get a show. If Taryn wanted to show off for his driver, she was gonna let him. It didn't matter. He was gonna be dead too soon. Anybody who'd seen Star and could ID her was a goner. Because that's how the families would protect her identity. And on the ride home, a time was had. If the car hit a pothole, Star didn't know. She could barely tell you where they turned, what exits they took, or how long the ride was. Now, she wasn't completely off her square, because she wasn't going to let Taryn take her to some unknown location. But she was going to get hers. Indeed. Meanwhile, in Denver, True was woken up to the smell of food cooking in the kitchen. She'd only been asleep for a few hours, from the time that Bosch had told her that he'd never forgotten what she said when he first arrived in Denver, until the time she finally fell asleep. Bosch had proven that he'd earned his reputation. But so had True. They'd both licked and sucked every part of one another, without reservation. Bosch had set it off in that kitchen. The entire house was covered in cameras, with the exception of the bathrooms and bedrooms. Those cameras were only monitored by Bosch. The security team had access to them as needed, and all it took was for True to put in her code to temporarily disable them. And she did. The only time that she had a second thought about what she was doing was when she allowed herself to remember that she was in a cabin owned by Big Wood. She could only imagine that he would be rolling over in his grave if he hadn't been cremated. And while she didn't know what the afterlife held, she'd been comforting herself with the belief that somehow Big Wood was still with her. But this was not a time for him to be with her. All she could do was hope that on the other side, he'd understand. He knew his girl. She was able to put those thoughts out of her mind by remembering that he wasn't there to do anything about it. And one way or the other, her life was going to have to move on. As long as they didn't take their exploits to the master bedroom, she was going to be fine. Both she and Bosch were set up in guest rooms. That was a decision that she'd made as soon as she found out she would be staying at Big Wood's cabin. The master bedroom held way too many memories. It was bad enough she was in his house. She didn't need to be in his bed, too. So when Bosch finished devouring True in that kitchen, he closed her robe back up and walked her to the door of the Four Seasons room. He went inside and cranked up the electric fire pit. And as the room heated up, he brought her inside, and they heated up too. Bosch had to slow True down. She was in a hurry. He wasn't. He planned to take his time, to learn every inch of her, to discover what she liked and what she didn't, and to give her all the things she liked. So he rubbed, he caressed, he stroked, he pinched, he kissed, he licked. He used all his fingers and explored every part of her. And in the process, True had multiple big O's. As experienced as she was, she had no idea that she could have O's as a result of some of the things that Bosch was doing. She hadn't had a whole lot of backdoor play, other than externally. But Bosch had introduced fingers to that area, and with stimulation only there, and his lips alternating between her nipples, she'd shaken harder than she ever had before. And when he was done, all she wanted was the D. She had to have it. She didn't know what Genesis was going to do, but she was going to lose her whole and entire mind if her unborn baby gave her any issues. When she said, I need to feel you inside me, Bosch said, you tell me if it hurts at all. And True said, okay. And then Bosch, slowly, carefully, eased 9 very thick inches inside True's oven. And as he did, he was enveloped in hot, gushy heaven. And he prayed that True didn't say she was in pain. Because if he had to stop, he was going to lose his mind. When she moaned, he got nervous. He said, you good? True said, yeah. She was shocked. Not only did baby Genesis not give her any problem, but it seemed like he had adjusted himself to make penetration more comfortable. And as brutal Bosch slowly went in and out of True, she did what she'd been wanting to do for weeks. She folded herself around her belly and started kissing all over his tattoos.